In order to study in Canada, majority of students require a study permit. The issuance of a study permit is at the discretion of the Canadian immigration officer. Unfortunately, it is common for students to be refused study permits for a variety of reasons, especially for students coming from third world countries. This mainly happens when there is a doubt about your true intentions of studying in Canada, even after you've gone overboard to submit documents to justify why you need to come to Canada to study. I know how it feels to have your study permit refused, especially when you've given it your best shot. It happened to me twice before my study permit was even approved. And this, in my case, I had a US visa, a UK visa, a Schengen visa, all multiple entry for multiple years, and even a Canadian visa valid for over a year. But I was still refused a study permit. And this happened not even once, but twice. And on both occasions, I gave it my best shot. And even people who saw my application were wondering how I was refused a study permit with the kind of application I submitted. When it happens, it is not easy to swallow. Most people feel lost and confused. But when that happens, that is not the end of the road. There are options available to you that you can take to at least redress the situation and get your dream back on track. In the event that your study permit is refused, the visa officer will issue a letter stating the grounds on which your study permit was refused. However, my advice after receiving this letter for any refusal is that the first thing that you need to do is to find out why your application was refused, because the letter that is issued by the immigration officer are mostly generic reasons that they pick to refuse your application on. And if you look at past refusal letters, you realize that almost everybody will have at least one of those reasons stated in their letter. So the most important part of it is to find out the exact reasons why your study permit is refused. However, first things first, the first thing that you should do when you get a refusal letter for your study permit is to request for your GCMS notes. Global Case Management System is an electronic data management that is used by the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, that is IRCC, to process applications from both overseas and within Canada. Immigration officers enter their notes and concerns about your application into this GCMS system. So the letter that the immigration officer will issue you on refusal has reasons from a predetermined list of reasons that they have, and will not give you the exact reasons why he refused your application. That list only gives a basic information of the reason why he chose to refuse your application. So if you submitted a study permit application to IRCC, you are entitled to see your GCMS notes, to see the concerns that the immigration officer had about your application, because they are required to put those concerns into the system. And as an applicant, you can request to see those reasons, and that will guide you to decide whether you want to now counter the reasons or go ahead and make amendments to your application and reapply. I strongly recommend you that you request for these notes, because it will help you on how to address your refusal. Frequently, applications are refused for reasons that have no relevance to the applicant's current situation. A typical example was in my case. When I requested for my first refusal notes, I found out that the officer actually was referring to me as a she, and he was actually thinking that I was being sponsored by my parents, even though all the documents that I submitted proved to the contrary and showed that actually I was self-sponsored. So basically, he didn't even pay close attention to my application and chose to refuse it on reasons that had no relation to my current situation. And the funny thing was that I even found out in my refusal notes that the officer was thinking that I was even unemployed, even though I had letters attached to my application showing that I have never been employed for the last 14 years. And I was even currently employed because I attached letters from my company showing my current salary, my position, and all the positions that I've held since I've been in that company. The cost of applying for your GCMS notes is only $5 and it can be done by anybody who is currently resident in Canada. Even if you are outside Canada, you can give the authority to somebody in Canada to apply on your behalf. If you don't have any family or friend in Canada who can request for it for you, there are third-party websites available that can help you to request for these GCMS notes. And some of them will bill you between 10 to 40 Canadian dollars based on how detailed you want them to at least get the notes for you, because some of them offer the option of even giving you explanation on what the notes actually means. Once you have received your notes, now you can assess and see whether the grounds on which the immigration officer chose to refuse your application were valid or not. If you find out that your study permit was refused on valid grounds because maybe you forgot to attach a particular document or forgot to state something that was required, now you can make the decision to make the changes in subsequent application so that you can increase the chance of you getting approved. However, if you find out that the grounds on which he chose to refuse your application were not valid, then you can pursue other means of appeal to try and get amends on that situation and correct the error that he has done. You can't even apply for this GCMS notes whilst your application is still in progress. So basically, a month after submitting your application, you can apply for this GCMS notes to help you get an idea of how your application is being processed. It even tells you the immigration office that is currently processing your application. I found out when I requested for mine during my application time that my application was actually being processed in Vietnam. My application bounced between Accra, Vietnam, and London. And when I requested, I was able to see all the processes that are going on, at least the things that are being done on my application, whether it's being attended to or not, and even the last time that at least somebody touched my application. And the good news is, if you apply for the GCMS notes whilst your application is still in progress, and you find out that the immigration officer has concerns about your application, you can quickly put together answers and submit it through a web form so that he can have it and make the necessary decision concerning your application. You don't have to wait to be refused to see those reasons, because if you see it earlier, you can now counter it for him to at least go ahead and approve your application. If your study permit is refused, you should get in touch with your school to request for a deferral, because most schools will allow you to defer for free if you're able to prove to them that your study permit was actually refused and that you cannot show up for your intake. And some of them will allow you to defer for free without an extra charge. And if you choose to get a refund, they will need to see the refusal letter before they can go ahead and at least refund your fees that you've paid to them. In the last video, I went over some mistakes that I felt you can avoid to increase the chances of having your study permit approved. But in case you do all this and you still have your study permit refused, there are a few options available to you. And today, I want to at least share some light on some of them so that in case your study permit is approved, you won't be confused and you will know exactly what you're supposed to do after at least applying for your GCMS notes and seeing whether your application was refused on valid grounds or not. As a foreign national, if your study permit is refused by the IRCC, there are 3 options that are available to you that you can explore based on what you see in your GCMS notes and at least the time that you have on hand before your school starts. I always say delay is not denial, and don't let your dream die just because you were refused your application. I have seen people who were refused up to even 7 times reapply and get approved. You just need to be dedicated to the course and at least try and improve your application with every single refusal. The first option that is available to you on refusal is judicial review. That is basically what we call appeal. If you believe that your study permit application met all the requirements that IRCC needed and that you requested for your GCMS notes and you find out that an error was made, then as a foreign national, you have the option to appeal the decision of the immigration officer. You may challenge the refusal in court through a 2-step process. First, you need to seek leave to appeal the decision. If leave is granted, then you can go ahead to appeal the decision of the immigration officer through the judicial review process. And remember, you need to seek leave to appeal the decision within 60 days after receiving your refusal letter. So that means within 60 days of receiving your refusal letter, you should make a decision whether you want to appeal the decision or not. Note that in the judicial review process, the court will not just substitute the decision of the immigration officer, but they will review the process that led to his decision and make a decision whether it was reasonable or not. So it's not like the court will make a decision that go ahead and issue a visa to this person. What they will end up doing is they will decide whether a decision needs to be redetermined. That means if they feel that the decision was unfair, they will not go ahead and just issue you a visa, but instead they will decide that it should be redetermined and your application will be given to another immigration officer to now make a decision on it. And I've seen people go through the judicial process where the decision was set aside and offered to another immigration officer, and still they were refused again. But sometimes, once you are going through this process, the IRCC lawyers will decide to now offer a settlement to the applicant if they feel that you have a case. So if your lawyers are able to make a case for why your case was at least not reasonable, sometimes you can get a settlement offer where the IRCC or lawyers will say that, okay, now let's settle this case out of court and offer it to another immigration officer to review the application so he can make a decision whether to give him the study permit approval or not. But sometimes other cases can end up going through the full process of going through application for seeking leave, submissions and everything, all the way to the court for the case to get in front of a judge for the decision to be made. The truth is, the judicial review process is complex, time-consuming, and sometimes it can be very costly. And remember, you are not allowed to submit new evidence at this appeal stage. So basically, any decision that will be made at this stage will be based on the documents that you submitted during your application process. That is why I always advise that make sure you put together a complete application. That way, if you decide to go for an appeal, all the documents will be available to support your case without having to now resubmit new documents in the process. So the truth is, your appeal will not succeed if your original application was not strong enough. The true cost of actually going through this judicial review process costs $50, but truthfully, you will need an immigration lawyer to guide you through this process, because as a normal applicant, it will be difficult for you to understand the legal stuff that needs to be done to at least go through this process successfully. But my advice is, when it comes to choosing a lawyer to work with through the judicial review process, remember, not all immigration lawyers are specialized in this. And I learned it the hard way. I'm still dealing with my lawyers because they don't even know I've been approved and I'm here in Canada. And this is a story that I'll tell you guys some other time, because the case is still ongoing and I'm trying to take them on because I felt scammed in a way. And when push comes to shove, I might even mention their name here so that some of you will try to avoid them in the near future. Do your research when it comes to picking a lawyer so that you don't end up contracting a structural engineer to go and do the work of a carpenter, which might end up costing you too much. From my experience going through this process, and at least working with other applicants who were also going through the process, the cost of going through the judicial review process can cost an applicant between $200 to as high as $9,000 plus taxes. And it all depends on the legal firm that you choose to work with through this process. And this is the cost of the lawyers working on your application, preparing it to be submitted to the court for the judicial review process to at least to proceed. The price range is huge because different lawyers price differently. Some lawyers will price for each stage separately, whilst others will price for the whole process as one. So with one payment, they will take you from the beginning to the end, whilst others will price for individual stages. And I've realized from going through the process that sometimes those who price for the whole process end up offering you value for your money. When it comes to going to court, I always say you can have a bad case, but you can never afford to have a bad lawyer. So pick your lawyer wisely. You may have different reasons for filing your appeal. Regardless, you may have different results at different stages of the application, depending on who you are working with. Some of these outcomes could be your request for appeal could be denied at the leave stage. Your request for leave could be approved and the judge will choose to hear your case in courts. You can get settlement offer at different stages of the process by the immigration lawyers if they feel that your lawyer has a case. The judge can hear your case and make a decision that you have a valid case, so your case should be reopened and it will be offered to a new immigration officer who can still decide whether to approve it or even refuse it. The second option that is available to you in case your application is refused is called reconsideration. This is an option in cases where your application was refused due to what could be misunderstanding of information that you provided in your application. I would only recommend this option if it is clear that the officer made an error, because if the officer arrived at his conclusion based on reasonable and objective reasoning, then the chances of you being successful is very slim. Reconsideration can cost you about $2,500 depending on the lawyer that you choose to use in this particular scenario. So similar to the previous option, the lawyer will review your case and decide on why he thinks you have a case and prepare his legal documents and arguments to support your case and submit on your behalf. If an immigration officer refuses your application, you have the option to request for a reconsideration. However, you may not just request for a reconsideration just because you don't agree with his decision. You have to include enough information and documents to prove at least one of the following. One, the officer made a clerical error. Example, he didn't notice a document that you added. Two, there is a humanitarian or compassionate grounds for your application to be reconsidered. Three, you detected an obvious mistake in facts or law. Four, the complementary evidence that you found could convince the immigration officer to change his decision. And like in the previous option, you can end up having your application reopened and maybe additional documents requested, or the immigration officer can still end up turning down your application for reconsideration. That means your refusal will still stand. And also sometimes you can have the immigration officer not even responding to your application for reconsideration. That means your application will be sitting there whilst you continue waiting. The third option that is available to you in case your study permit is refused, and that is the most common option that I have seen most people at least use, is refiling a new application. If you believe the grounds for your refusal are valid, then your best option is just to at least review those mistakes, correct them in a new application, and resubmit a much more complete application. This time, you make sure to address all the concerns that led to your refusal in the earlier application. My advice to most applicants who are refused, if they decide to refile a new application, is to add a letter of explanation to the new application, addressing every single reason that the officer raised to refuse them in the earlier application. That is why in this case, having the GCMS notes becomes very important, because instead of addressing a generic reason, now you have his exact words that he used to refuse your earlier application, and you can quote them and respond to each line one by one so that he cannot now use them again against you, because you've addressed them in your new application, and that can improve the chances of him approving your application this time around. And also, if any documents needs updated because maybe the dates have maybe elapsed and you need to update them from the previous application, this will be a good time to request for new ones so that they will be updated for your new application. Things like admission letters, bank statements, documents that are time bound, like maybe police certificate and all other things, you can request for new ones to strengthen your application before you submit them. So you have a more complete application this time around. And like any other application, the possible outcomes that you can get with refiling is same with any other application. You can either get approved or refused. And if you get refused, then now the process starts all over again. If you get approved, then that's good news. Your dream of moving to steady begins. Then will be time to now start packing your bag, buying a plane ticket, and making plans to travel. But if you get refused, then you go back and redo everything again. But don't be afraid to at least resubmit a new application, because you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And all you can do is to at least shoot your shots and leave the rest for the immigration officer to decide. Because the chances of you being approved with every application, when you submit, just about 50%. The rest will sit with the immigration officer. So if you have your application refused, don't be dejected. My advice is to request for your GCMS notes. And based on the reasons that you see, you can make a decision whether to go with any of these three. That is, whether you want to do judicial review, or you want to go for reconsideration, or you want to refile a new application. And my advice is to find a group to join. There are enough people out there who are in similar situations like yours, and it will be easier to relate and share ideas with them. There are groups for people who are going through judicial review. When I was going through mine, trust me, there are about 20 of us in the group. The funny thing is, everybody ended up being approved in the long run. But at least we were able to support each other through the process by sharing ideas on best practices and other things that you could do. And we were able to learn on how to at least keep our application and monitor it, because those who have gone through it share their ideas for the new people to at least also learn from it. And if you want to join one, you can reach out to me and I'll point you to some of these groups so that you can join and learn from others. And at this point, I would like to say thank you to all my friends that I found in the Judicial Review Buddies group. You guys at least supported me in those hard times. And I would like to say thank you. I know most of you are landing in Canada the next couple of weeks. Thank you guys, and hopefully we get to see each other in person. And if you got value out of this video, kindly hit the subscribe button. Enjoy this family whilst we learn together, and at least you learn from my experience. And do well to share this video with family and friends so that they can also get value out of it. Thank you. Until the next video. Cheers.